believes that's where all the aliens are.
Believes.
So yeah, so Tex has been like, oh, all the aliens are in Antarctica. So now that we have somebody that's actually been to Antarctica, they can talk about the pyramids and the aliens.
Yeah. So I think we just spend the rest of the our time together talking about the flat Earth, the aliens, the wall, things of that nature.
Somebody that
There's just a big wall in Antarctica that you can't go over because that's how they know it's flat.
That's the ice wall, like in the Game of Thrones documentaries.
It's very true, and there's a big dragon on the other side to melt it, so it's gonna be cool.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thanks for coming on Power Through Radio, man. We really appreciate it. And, we're actually not, at least on this side of the table, not a flat earther. I don't know about this guy. But no, it's great to have you on. Thank you.
Great to be here with you guys. Yeah. Well, as you can probably imagine, having walked across Antarctica by myself solo, I have encountered a fair share of the flat earthers. They're out there, man. They're maybe one of you are them, not pointing any fingers, but they're out there. So just wait for the comments on this pod, of all the reasons I couldn't have possibly walked across the continent alone.
Theoretically, if you walked across Antarctica, then how would, they'd be like, well, he walked across the rim.
That's what I'm saying. It's a spinning point.
Or I'm part of the conspiracy.
Yes. Well, that's the easier one.
That's the easier one. Right?
Here's the other weird thing for me is with the flat earthers, there's always such like a 7-layer detailed thing where you got to go through like 75 steps for them to confirm it. Where you're like, well, what about all the other stuff we see that's round? And they're like
paths, Sean.
Yeah. Like we watched some video where this dude analyzed all these flight paths and based off of like this 7-hour geometrical equation that involved string theory. This is how we know the Earth is flat. And I'm like, but what about this stuff that we see? And now,
so I'll tell you a quick funny story, not to get us too far down the flat earther passage to kick things off, but we're here. I'll tell you one funny story. So I get back from crossing Antarctica solo, humbled by press and media attention in my hometown of Portland, Oregon. After doing a bunch of national media and whatever, the mayor calls a press conference. And the mayor of Portland, Oregon decides that he's going to make a mayoral decree. And the day that I finished was December 26, 2018. He said, December 26 is going to be Colin O'Brady Day forever into the future in Portland, Oregon. So, there's a mayoral decree making that. And the mayor's cool. He's summited Everest. He's been in the North Pole. He's done some cool expeditions. I actually know him a little bit before. So anyways, that's kind of fun, just ceremonial kind of thing. And this press conference, I don't know, there was probably like 300-400 people there, something like that. It was at the big historical society, and do a little Q&A sitting there. And finally, the night's winding down. People are starting to leave, and my family's just waiting around for me. We're gonna have dinner afterwards. And as people start filing out, there's my family, and there's like one dude like standing in the corner like of this thing. And I'm like, I'm talking to my mom, talking to my wife, and they're like, I think there's one more person that might want to take a picture of you, ask you questions, something like that. And so I see this guy kind of hanging around, I'm like, but he's sticking to himself. And so I walk over and I said, oh, thank you so much for coming. And he was like, oh, finally, we get to talk. And I was like, oh, great. What's up, man?
I'm from the CIA.
Like, I have driven 10 hours from some rural part of Northern California in the middle of nowhere. He's like, to be here to talk to you in person. And I was waiting for all the rest of them to leave so we could have a real conversation. I know you had to do the thing up there with the mayor or whatever, but like, for real, man. For real. Now it's just the two of us. What was it like at the edge? The edge. Like you went there to the edge. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, the edge of the world, because the Earth is flat. And I started cracking up. I was like, this is fucking hilarious, man.
Were you looking around for cameras and asking Kuchar to jump out and punk you?
Hilarious, because I thought he was joking. And then I was like, oh damn, like, you are being dead serious. And I was like, oh man, like, I know I didn't have the heart to just like crush his dreams. I was just like, that just wasn't my experience there. And he was like, oh, okay. So are people listening? He basically like walked away like, oh, I get it. You got to stay. But he was like, looked at me like winked, like, but you and I both know the real story.
Oh my God.
So yeah, man, flat Earth conspiracy is real. People buy into it deep.
I was going to say, we just kind of dropped people into the middle of this conversation. I saw, so would you do us a favor and, give a little bit of bio, a little bit of background, and more importantly, like tell people, because, the accomplishments are pretty fantastic. So for the people that don't know.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So, Colin O'Brady, I am, I guess, professional endurance athlete, explorer, adventurer. I have 10 world records for various things and expeditions. As we talked about, I was the first person in history to cross Antarctica solo, unsupported by resupplies and fully human powered. So that had never been done before. Several other world records for speed climbing in mountains. I was the fastest to complete something called the Explorer's Grand Slam. So that's to climb the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents, as well as go to the North and South Pole, includes Everest, Denali, Kilimanjaro, et cetera, all that in 139 days. Speed record for the 50 high points, which is the tallest mountain on each of the 50 US states. I did all 50 in 21 days. I did other crazy world firsts, which we could talk about, something I'd never done before setting my mind on it. But me and a team of others, we were the first people to ever row a boat across Drake Passage. So no sail, no motor, nothing, just us rowing a boat. And that's from the southern tip of South America to Antarctica. Drake Passage is known to be the most dangerous ocean passage in the world. We hit 40-foot swells and icebergs and things like that. So rowed a boat across there. So those are the types of things that I'm into. But also, passionate in a lot of other ways, entrepreneur, business person. I've written a couple books at this point. My first book, The Impossible First, was a New York Times bestseller, memoir about the Antarctica crossing. And I think we'll get into it more today, but excited. My new book's coming out. It's called The 12-Hour Walk, which is really a deep dive on mindset, how we can overcome limiting beliefs, train our mind, and ultimately has a call to action for everyone that I believe that in just one day, the subtitle is Invest One Day, Conquer Your Mind, and Unlock Your Best Life. So a tool in there and a call to action for a one-day prescription that's accessible to anyone at no cost that I really think is a game-changing thing. So I'm excited to talk about that as well. So yeah, man, that's who I am. I'm lots of other things as well, but that's a good place to start, I suppose.
So the like origin story is pretty amazing. Like you decided to go travel, end up in Thailand, go jump on some flaming jump rope, burn yourself up. And all of a sudden you're, in some hospital and deal, and your mom comes in and kind of challenged you within it. Was this something that you had always had, this kind of like, daredevil, unbreakable deal, or was it something that kind of matured within that moment?
It's funny, like it's easy. Sorry, there's a sound in the room I'm in. I apologize. I'm in Spain right now.
No problem. It's probably the flat earthers. Fucking they found you.
I think it's a flat earther on a landline. I haven't seen one of those in a long time in this apartment. I apologize for that, everyone listening. Hopefully that doesn't come back. Anyways, it's very easy, I think, to categorize the things that I've done. I just told you a laundry list of things where I could have easily, killed myself or, whatever, to say, oh God, this guy's such a risk taker. This guy's, such living on the edge. And clearly I'm willing to accept some level of risk, but I don't really characterize myself. I don't think I'm an adrenaline junkie, a thrill seeker. I think I am curious for myself and for others about human potential, about pushing our bodies to our limits and finding those edges. But not in a, overtly reckless way, like, oh, let's just, let's play a game of Russian roulette. I hope I don't, kill myself here. So I don't really think of it that way, but I do think, the origin story is important. And I think that throughout my entire life, there's been a lot of grit. I didn't grow up with a lot of money as a kid. But I had a mother, as you mentioned in this burn accident, my mother, my entire life, though, it was just really saying to me like, hey, like, you can do anything you set your mind to, even though we didn't have a lot. She was really incepting with that mindset, work hard, train hard, dream big. And I think that played out throughout my life, but certainly, that was a great, cliff notes on that burn story. We don't even necessarily go deeper on the story itself, but that was a massive setback in my life. I had been a collegiate swimmer. I was a nationally ranked swimmer, a soccer player, swam in college, and went on a trip around the world. I painted houses when I was a kid, all the way through high school and into college, and said, I'm going to sock away $1,000 every end of every summer. And by the time I graduate from college, I'm going to have enough for a plane ticket and, few bucks to sleep on the ground at some youth hostels and a few beers and, hitchhike or whatever, just get by on the cheap. But I want to see the world because I wasn't, didn't have that experience when I was a kid growing up. And that was great. But then I get burned in this fire. I'm told by Thai doctors, I will never walk again normally. They look at me and I say, you'll never walk again normally. And it was a massive turning point in my life where I remember that feeling in that Thai hospital, getting that news. The physical pain was terrible. I burned 25% of my body. There's a cat running around my bed in the ICU. But more than anything, I remember the emotional trauma of somebody saying, hey, you're never going to be the athlete you were. You're not going to be able-bodied anymore. I mean, you guys are all about athletics and training and everything that you guys around me. Just somebody just instantly in one instant takes that away from you. And who took it away? Me. I took it away from myself. Like I was an idiot. And I said, hey, I should jump a flaming jump rope. Like I messed up to the maximal, changed my life. But my mother comes into that room and she says to me, I know now she was actually, you know, in the hospital wings crying with the doctors and pleading for news, but she never showed me that fear. Instead, she came into my room every single day saying, what do you want to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal. And I was like, Mom, a goal, like, you know, like my life as I know it is over. She's like, no, close your eyes and visualize what you want to do getting out of here. And I finally played along with her. I closed my eyes, and for whatever reason, I picture like the Kona Ironman NBC coverage from a kid. I'm like, oh, triathlon. I don't know. I guess it's some deep sea to go. Maybe one day I can finish a triathlon. And she says, great. And she could have easily said, no, I said set a goal, but look at your legs. Like, let's set something a little more realistic, you know? And she had says, great, let's set this goal. And triathlon is focused and fixed in my mind. And for the next 18 months, again, I won't get into all the details, to learn how to walk again normally, get out of a wheelchair, fly back to the United States, et cetera. And I signed up for the Chicago Triathlon. I raced the Chicago Triathlon, and I eventually win that race. So I didn't just finish the race, but I placed first out of 5,000 other participants on the day. But your original question is about, did I always have that in me? In that moment of crossing that finish line of the triathlon, I didn't look back and go like, you know what? I always knew I was a superhuman athlete. I'm a badass. I'm so much better than everyone else. No. The opposite. My mind went back to that Thai hospital and said, thank God my mother was there, because I, left up to my own faculties, was going to go down the most negative, downward spiral, destructive mindset. But my mother, I call it this now. I didn't call it this at the time, but it's a core part of the book. I call it a possible mindset. My mom equipped me with an empowered way of thinking that unlocks a life of limitless possibilities. And she said, yes, bad situation, but let's get through it. And so from that moment, and this was, 14 years ago or something like that, I see so many other butterfly and ripple effects throughout the last 14 years, these world records, all this stuff we could talk about. But that moment, my mother, the foundational training, so to speak, of not just my body. Sure, I had great coach's body. We'll talk about the body side of it, but the mind side of it. My mom saying, hey, if you don't believe this, if you can't visualize a better future for yourself, you're not going to be anywhere. And that's my mind went back to at that finish line of the triathlon. My mind's got back there so many other times. So forgive the long answer, but I think it's been a part of me, but I don't think that it's an innate. I don't know that it's an innate part of me, right? I think that I have been, fortunate to have some amazing influences in my life. And part of the mission with the 12-hour walk is to say like, hey, like I'm no different than you or any person listening. We all have the strength inside of us. And there's a way to conjure that I think we all have access and the ability to do.
Yeah. And you mentioned the 12-hour walk, and I had the opportunity to get into it. In the start of it, you were in a position like many people out there. You were trapped in your own home up there in the top west. I've been
Pacific Northwest. Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, we're all like the IPAs, mountain biking, and hippies.
Totally.
Yeah,
perfect.
It's part of the world.
Yeah. Not my cup of tea. But then you're trapped up there with all these people, and you wanted to.
I went to Berkeley, so this is just an ongoing thing. Texas from Texas, obviously.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's a good banter. I like that. But
you dropped us right into that mindset, that moment where you got complacent, you got lazy, you were told not to do anything, and you didn't. But it just, you had this innate itch now that you've developed, conquering the world, and you wanted to turn it into something, even though the world was telling you not to. You wanted to create action, and that's the dawn of this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm literally, I just published my other book, ironically, in early 2020. I was planning to go on an Everest expedition right after that. I'd been on this expedition, planning this with my wife. And as we all know, March of 2020, boom, the world just changes, right? Everyone's world changes, shifts, the world's never the same. And we end up going to a cabin that my family has on the Oregon coast. It's just me, my wife, and our dog kind of holed up there for a couple of months, watching the news, listening to all the, horrible stories coming out around the world, stay at home, don't leave, all the things that we all live through. And I found myself, I guess not that dissimilar to the mindset of that Thai hospital of just the negative, like the fear loop of the news and the scroll in the social media. And I'm a social guy, like not a lot of interactions with other people, and FaceTime my family, make sure everyone's okay. And I'm just like, man, like I feel terrible. Like I'm like sitting on my couch and not even like changing out of my, pajamas any given day. And I thought back in my mind, I'm trying to like kind of like grasp for straws a little bit. I'm like, man, like when was the last time that I felt like at peace, like in my body, mind, strong, in my soul? Like when was that? And ironically, where I went to in my mind was, it was when I was crossing Antarctica solo. Now, I pulled a 375-pound sled across Antarctica filled with food and fuel. I was eating 7,000 calories a day, which sounds like a ridiculous amount, but I was burning 10,000 calories a day. So you multiply that by 54 days, and I was a bag of bones at the end, ribs sticking out, hips sticking out. People have tried this crossing before and had to, someone died trying, someone had to eject because they ran out of food. Like I'm like on my absolute limit.
How many miles
was 932 miles. I imagine I probably zigzagged a little bit, so we could probably add some additional to that. But the route was 932 miles from one coast via the South Pole to the opposing ice shelf coast. And so basically every single day I pulled my sled for 12 hours because the math, like if I didn't pull my sled 12 hours, I was going to run out of food. I wasn't going to get far enough. And so my days were 12 hours. And to add to that, there's 5 hours of chores on either side. I'm setting up my tent myself. I'm melting snow and ice and turning it into water. I mean, the 12 hours is me walking. The rest of the time, there's all sorts of other things that survive in Antarctica. And I couldn't take a day off, meaning average temperatures minus 30, minus 40, but a bunch of the days, majority of the days, there's 50, 60 mile per hour headwinds, the wind chills minus 70. And I'm still getting up every single day. Boom, 12 hours. Boom, 12 hours. And my other book, The Impossible First, gets in the whole story, which is, I was actually racing another guy, this British military captain. There's a whole sort of intensity of that story, back and forth battle there, psychological, physical, etc. But when I'm sitting back in my Oregon Coast House during COVID, I'm like, man, despite the intensity of that environment, there was something so calm and peaceful for me. What was it? And I realized like disconnecting for that period of time. Now, I'm not recommending people go walk across Antarctica 54 days by themselves, but there was something simple about just being like, man, I didn't have like phone. I wasn't reading the news. I wasn't this. And I just looked over my wife and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for a long walk by myself tomorrow. And I'm going to put my phone on airplane mode, basically. As simple as that. Just at the Oregon coast. She's like, okay, like we're doing nothing. We're sitting here like waiting out this pandemic. At least we all thought at the time, oh, this will blow over in a month.
3 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
That's what we were told.
Exactly. So I go for this walk. It's all day. And I come back and I'm like, wow, like I feel for the first time since all this lockdown, this COVID, whatever, like the best that I felt again, physically, mentally, spiritually, etc., just centered. And so it just kind of a light bulb sprung in my mind, which is like, oh, I love my Antarctica crossing. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be something I'm proud of for the rest of my life. Cherish that memory. But is there a way to tap back into that mindset, that peace, that calm, that intensity, that body-mind connection without going all the way to Antarctica? So I called some other friends and I said, hey, this might sound ridiculous, but I'm not doing anything right now. Try this thing. It's called the 12-hour walk. Like, what is it? Okay. Walk out your front door, put your phone on airplane mode and go for a 12-hour walk. But I can't walk for 12 hours. Yeah, it's fine. Take as many breaks as you want. Sit down. I don't care if you go 1 mile or 50 miles. This is mental exercise more than it is physical. You don't got to train for it. You don't have to prepare for it. Literally, take 100 breaks if you feel like you need to. But the only thing you can't do is turn your phone on, check your social media, throw on a podcast. Don't get me wrong, guys. I like podcasts. Just one day without podcasts. So, I love what you guys are doing here. But, you're not
going to hurt our feelings, dude. Don't sweat it.
One day. And it has been amazing the amount of people that have taken this walk. And I'll ask you guys, like, what's the longest you've spent in the last, let's call it the last 10 years, this chapter of your life where you have had no external inputs. So every time you check your phone, the clock resets. Sleeping doesn't count. Every time your kids walk in the room, clock resets. Music is on, clock resets. TV is on, clock resets. Like, what's the longest period of time that you have experienced that state of mind?
My fast thinking is we used to travel the world, coaches. I mean, some of those flights were 12 hours
Yeah, but
So
you were watching something.
I know, aimed to read, but I mean, Tom Cruise movies are just so tempting.
Man, that's a really good point. I probably doing some form of work here. We live out here in the middle of Texas, and like I fabricate and weld and like build trucks and like as a hobby, and then we do a bunch of ranch work and stuff. I mean, probably in the shop, like where the radio's on, and I want no part of answering my phone, and so I put it on, and it's pretty funny because my wife gets pissed. She'll actually send the kids up to come find me, because she knows I have my phone off. Yeah. They'll be like, Dad, Mom said you haven't answered. And so probably in the shop or like doing something around here. Like we went out on, man, it was right after the week after Christmas. We have the guy that we got the property from built a dam in the 50s, and it got overgrown. And we went out there with chainsaws, and we're out there for like 12 hours, like just cutting stuff down. And it was amazing because I forgot my phone. It's something where in the moment, at least for me, like it doesn't feel like a big thing. But then the minute that all of a sudden you kind of like mentally think about it, you think like, oh my God, wait a minute. Like I haven't checked my phone in 12 hours. What if somebody died? Or what if the whole world burned down? And then you're like, So yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
I'm on social media constantly. Like I love technology. Like this is not me as like oh, hey, let's go back to the Stone Age. Like I'm a big pro technology person. And even what you said, which is, working on a project, specifically welding, or, you're with a lot of people, your phone's up, maybe with a buddy cutting down trees or whatever you guys are doing. Even that is more inputs than the 12-hour walk, which is to say, like, there is a hard reset that we can do. And it's one day. Like, I'm not saying like train for this for a year and then, I need to sit in silence like a monk for 10 days. And it's like literally, man, like you got a pair of shoes, put a day on your calendar, walk outside your soccer starter's house, spend a day by yourself. And, I've even built an app to support this, which is ironic, right? Because of technology, but the app, what it does is it puts your phone in airplane mode, but it still gives you a clock. And it still gives you a map so you don't get lost. It tracks where you're walking. So you know where you're going, like a Google Maps, things. And at the end, you're like, I completed the 12-hour walk. And you get an email and some love from me to say, hey, congratulations. But the idea itself is simple, but the power behind it is deep. The power behind it is immense. The book itself, it breaks down the 10 most common limiting beliefs that we all have. So I felt this, you felt this. I'm pretty sure we've all felt this at some time. It's, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I'm not strong enough. What if I fail? What if people criticize me? It's that negative voice that we're all aware of. I mean, I've done some things in my life, but I still have that, man. And I throw you in. It's not like some scientific research, kind of heavy textbook. This is, you guys read pieces of it. It sounds like, this throws you right into some deep adventure stories. You're on a rowboat with me and it's 40-foot swells and the water's crashing over your head. It's a fast read, it's a page turner, but at its core, it's about saying like, hey, look, I've experienced all these limiting beliefs, but I figured out how to overcome them and thrive. And so can you. And that possible mindset I talked about, the empowered way of thinking to unlock a life of limitless possibilities. We have these limiting beliefs. And I fundamentally believe if you invest this one day in yourself, you can rewrite those limiting beliefs. You can go from saying, I hate being uncomfortable to, whoa, stepping outside my comfort zone, I can grow. That's the possible mindset. Or, you know what? I don't have enough time for this, that, and the other thing. All of a sudden you organize yourself, you take this one day and you're like, oh yeah, time is finite, but I can reorganize my time to accomplish the things I want to accomplish. Or I'm not afraid of failure anymore, or I'm not afraid of criticism anymore. And a lot of that can come through in the walk. And why the correlation is there is this. If you're on the other side, you're listening to this right now and you're hearing this for the first time, a 12-hour walk by myself like this, whatever. My bet is that actually a bunch of limiting beliefs popped up in your head, which is like, man, I'd be so bored. Or like, I can't walk for that long. My feet are going to hurt. Or, my wife would never, and we got 4 kids, my wife's never going to let me like take a Saturday and like, well, I don't have enough time for this kind of thing. This is nonsense, right? Those limiting beliefs that just popped up in your head in relationship to the 12-hour walk are most likely the exact same limiting beliefs that are holding you back from actually living your best life. Meaning this isn't the first time you've had that limiting belief. That limiting belief is playing out when you're thinking about taking that adventure you always want to take, starting that business you already wanted to start, pursuing that passion, going after that athletic goal. You're actually, this is just you looping. So the 12-hour walk, the physicality of the challenge but also the processing through it is not just the 12 hours itself, but it's a mirror that says, oh, hey, man, just a little wink to you like, oh, you're already running this loop. And you're running this loop, not just because of this one silly idea that you heard on a podcast about a 12-hour walk, but these limiting beliefs are holding you back. But when you actually commit to the walk, you take the walk, you all of a sudden go, man, when I first heard about this idea, I had these 5 excuses. I had these 5 limiting beliefs. I overcame them all. I completed the 12-hour walk. And that proves to me that I can actually overcome those in all of the different occurrences that they appear throughout the rest of my life, and therefore can lead, the life that I want, my best life.
And it interesting as you're talking, 2 things. One, I was thinking about our settlers, like, basically coming west in wagons and basically walking from, let's say, like, somewhere on the East Coast to California and getting over the mountains and just basically walking for months at a time with nothing else to do other than just keep moving. And to think like how far we've come. We're now like, oh my God,
hours.
You want me to walk without technology and without doing something for 12 hours? I mean, it's pretty fascinating to like think of how far we've come or how far we've fallen, depending on how you look at it. And then the other thing, similar story. I played in the NFL, and my very first NFL start at the end of the second half, I ruptured my patellar tendon, and they carted me off the field. And the doctor looked at it, they X-rayed it, and said, "We've never had anybody come back from this injury. Your career's finished." And that moment of like, "Fuck these people! I'm going to prove them all wrong," and then coming back and starting 16 games that next year was like, like it wasn't necessarily my parents were like, "We believe in you." It was literally like, "I'm going to prove these people wrong."
Hell
so I
yeah.
had this like feeling of like, fuck these people. I just got to the party and now they're already kicking me out. I'm not going. And so as you were telling that story, I've been in that moment of like self-doubt and this isn't going to work. And what am I going to do? And then you're like, I'm just going to keep moving forward and prove these people wrong. So that's,
I mean, it's whatever, you said it can come from so many different ways that, like I said, for me, that my mother was such an important moment when I was facing that circumstance, whether that's you just be like, man, this is my lifelong dream to be in the NFL. And I'm here for one day, one game. And all of a sudden it's I'm not going away that easy. Like, this is my dream.
What I was so scared of is like, I wanted to like, this guy, who is this guy? He started one game. Like it was this feeling that like I got here and this wasn't going to be my story. Like,
I don't want this to be the end of the story. Right.
And then I got to go play for another 10 years. So it was,
I love that.
Yeah, no,
that's
it was
inspiring, man.
That same feeling. And I like, as I was reading through your deal and like I've been in that moment and, I've done a lot of stupid things when I was like, jump rope, flaming jump rope. That sounds like something I would totally do. Should I do crossovers? Like, what are we going to do? Double Dutch? Like as I was sitting there thinking I would have been the next dude in line or like, hold on. Let me go first. I'll warm it up for you.
Ultimate hot pepper.
Yeah. As I was reading it, I was like, man, that is so something that I would do. And then here it is and gets you in this situation. And, I mean, it's like as you like going through these different stories, like this idea, and I'm sure you've heard this ad nauseum, dude, like this immovable spirit and like, this will to survive. And I'm sure people have tried to paint it. And I really like your deal where it's like, I just wanted to do something, something epic. And this is what I set my mind to.
That's also, I want to get into combining both these. Colin, you said time is finite. And John, the interesting thing that you said right there, just this, you had this goal or this finite goal. But in the presentation that you had at the beginning of the book, you had a gentleman similar to our flat earther that walked up to you and he thanked you, but he didn't have an Everest. And you're trying to pull something out of this old man, and almost like the experience that you write, he wasted his life. Mm-hmm. And you start the book out like shaking the reader. Dude, set a freaking goal right now before you're this old, sorry, rich old man. So like,
100%.
Yeah. What was the power and the impact there from this realizing, oh my God, this guy is pouring his soul into me that he wasted his life. Don't do it.
No, 100%. I want to double click on something you said real quick, which is about the settlers. It just made me smile, which is that I feel proud of this concept, this idea, whatever, but I also be the first to acknowledge that like it's almost like, I don't want to say lofting a softball, but it's like, this is in our DNA. Like you take the settlers, then you go back, another 100 years or 1,000 years before that. Like human beings have been like, we could say like, maybe you're not like the best mathematician of this, and that's a skill acquired over time, whatever. Like obviously, the asterisk, which is those of us who aren't able-bodied or can't walk or whatever. But like in general, human beings, healthy, normal, human beings have the ability to walk, right? It's one of the first things that we do. And so it's really pressing back into something that we've been doing for a very, very long time, and just kind of shaking people and saying like, hey, like this is something we all know how to do. It's accessible. And that's why we can dive into it. But your point about sort of the intro of this book and really the impetus for, wanting to share this story, which is, again, I'm proud of my accomplishments. But the thing that lights me up the most is being able to share those stories with people in a way that allows them to harness their power inside of themselves. And one of the ways that I frame that, as you mentioned, is asking a simple question. I started asking actually this question to elementary school kids. So I done a bunch of nonprofit work. My wife and I started a nonprofit back in 2015 that was all around inspiring kids. We still do the work, but inspiring kids to get outside, move their bodies, and live active and healthy lives. As childhood obesity is skyrocketing and stuff like that. So started spending a bunch of time in school gymnasiums. And, as my public profile has grown, we've done tons of these and I love it. One question I ask kids, there's elementary school kids. I say, kids, what's your Everest? And when I was your age, I wanted to climb Everest. I dreamed of it. I know how I was going to get there, but that's what I wanted to do. But you don't need to go climb mountains. What's your Everest? And what's amazing is that in a room full of kids, let's say, fifth grade and younger, I'm 500 kids in a gymnasium. I'll get 499 hands pop up. Maybe one shy kid in the back of the room doesn't raise his hand, but every single kid raised their hand and wants to tell me, my Mount Everest to be the first person in my family to graduate from college. My Mount Everest to make sure the snow leopards get off the endangered species list. My Everest is to be, whatever it is that kids are dreaming. And what I realized in that moment is that kids, just like we were born and pretty quickly in our first year or two of life, we figure out how to walk, even though we fall down a million times trying to figure it out as a 12-month-old baby. Kids are born with the possible mindset, meaning under 10, most kids haven't been knocked down by the quote unquote hardships and reality of life. Our minds are hardwired to actually believe in infinite possibilities of one's life. But I share this story in the opening about an older gentleman who pulled me aside at a speaking engagement. Like I said, I peg his age at, 75, 80 years old. Guy was gajillionaire, had all the money in the world, and pulls me aside as I share in the opening of this book. And he's like, man, I don't know what my Everest is. I don't know what my Everest was. I've always been so caught up in my life. And now I'm this old man. And he's basically offering regret, being like, I don't have time anymore to change it. Now, I'm oriented towards a very optimistic outlook, which I liked. And I said to him in that moment, and I share it in the book, which is, but you still have some amount of time. So we can talk about that. But that's beside the larger point. But the larger point is if you're coming across this book, you're thinking to myself, I'm 40 years old, I'm middle-aged, whatever, life hasn't, my 10-year-old self would be so disappointed in me or whatever. Like, you got lots of years to go. Like, you can shift this right now. And so to your point, I encourage people right off the get-go to say, give me something. Forget about the constraints, forget about the limiting beliefs. If possibilities are limitless, humor me for a second. If possibilities were limitless, tell me what your life would look like. What would you be doing? What would that look like? Paint that picture, set that goal for yourself, set that Everest. And now, a lot of people have an answer to that, which is great. But one answer I do get sometimes is, but what if I don't know what my Everest is? I can point people in a couple of directions. One's a visualization of just paint your picture of your best life and let's talk about that. But the other is the 12-hour walk. It's a walking meditation. It's a moment to reflect in this. If you really, really, really racking your brain and you actually can't think of one goal or one thing that you want to dedicate yourself to the way that you dedicated yourself to the NFL, or I dedicated myself to walking across Antarctica, you can't think of anything. Take the 12-hour walk still and have the question be, have the exploration, the curiosity be, my Mount Everest is to figure out what my Mount Everest is. just a curiosity. Go for the walk and let your brain free associate. I promise you're going to come back after 12 hours and go, oh, I've actually always wanted this. And it doesn't have, like, we're talking about achievement. Oh, this world record, this, NFL game, whatever. It can be less ephemeral. It can be less specific than that. It can be like, I want to have an amazing relationship with, my wife or my family. I want to start this business. I want to, feel calm and peace. I want to help other people. I mean, it can be anything. There's no answer. My canvas that I paint on happens to be the ends of the earth and mountaintops, but you can paint your masterpiece on any canvas you want. But once you fix that in your mind, you can set that. We can all start to figure out how to reverse engineer those limiting beliefs, shift that to possible mindset. And before you know it, you're actually going to be stepping into that best life.
Like, I find it hard to believe that a man would be 75 or 80 years old, but maybe that's like a different mindset where, I always think about like, don't die without scars. I mean, you got to be able to, I'm always amazed, especially with some like old dudes where I'll meet like older guys that have like the most epic stories, fought in wars, won law, have these, epic stories to tell. And I don't know if I've ever met anybody that didn't have any cool stories to tell. So it's interesting to hear like a 75 or 80-year-old dude. It's like, I was just so focused on money. I never really lived my life. And then the pain of regret of getting to the end of this thing and realizing at the end of the day, on your dying deathbed, it's not the money that you made. I mean, I know it was when my dad passed away, it wasn't like, oh, I wish I had another Rolex, or, let me tell you about the 3 Porsches I drove. I mean, it was about, not only like the adventures he had, the family and the people that were around him. I mean, those memories that you have in your last moment are really what's valuable. I mean, the Egyptians tried to take it with them. I mean, every culture has tried to take it with them, and you can't do it. So all you have is the experiences and the way you've influenced people, and the way that you've helped. And more importantly, like the people that, show up to your funeral to probably pay respect is probably a great indicator of what you've done.
100%, and I think that, again, the story I tell at the opening of this book is, it happened, and it's a short dialogue that I had with this guy. And right. So we're reading a little bit into it. And he wasn't saying to me, hey, I've done nothing with life. In fact, he was saying, I have more money than most people can ever dream of. He said that to me. I'll never forget that. But the juice, it wasn't like I couldn't tell you a cool story. He could probably tell, oh yeah, I was on that yacht this time, and when this and this happened and whatever. But what he was saying to me, and again, for somebody that might be a life well lived, then that's the point here, right? It's not to say, oh, being massively successful in business is bad. Like, that might be the life well lived, but he was sitting in integrity with himself in this vulnerable moment going, this wasn't the life that I really at my root core wanted or desired to live. I summited a bunch of mountains, a shitload of them, billions of them by, if I could measure his bank account, probably, hundreds of millions, billions of them. Right. But it wasn't the mountain that I wanted to climb. It wasn't the mountain that at my soul core. So to your point, at the end of the day, as much as the Egyptians try to take it with them, build these temples, fill it with, palaces of gold and whatever, I love talking to people of a generation or a couple generations older that you're like, it comes back to the same thing. The richest, the most successful, the least successful, the people down on their luck, whatever it is, it really comes down to a lot of the same stuff, like you said, which is experiences, community, it's somewhat simple, but it's also to say it's also infinite in terms of it's a snowflake, meaning we are all different people with different driving forces and things like that. So your integrity with your own self is the only thing that's important. And the thing that's hard not to do, of course, I think this older gentleman is a reflection of this, is to get up and get caught up in what other people think you should be doing. Living somebody else's dream, climbing somebody else's Everest. And there's a chapter in my book that breaks down the limiting belief of I'm afraid of what other people will say. And I open that story with this moment where I have this opportunity to race triathlon professionally. It's a sponsorship that allowed me to go some plane tickets around the world and sleep on some floors and stuff like this. But I've just, graduated from Yale with an economics degree. I grew up poor. Like, I finally got like a real job that like pays me good money on Wall Street, whatever. And I call my grandma up and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow and I'm going to go race triathlon professionally. And I love my grandmother. She passed away about 5-6 years ago, but she was a huge influence in my life as a kid, all the way through my 20s and early 30s. And she says to me, what? what are you talking about? Like, you're an idiot. Last time you went travel the road, you burned yourself to a crisp. You finally have a real job and a bright future in this, and you're going to like trash it in on some sport that you like never tried before, but you happen to win. Or, I mean, come on, Colin, like be realistic. And I love my grandma. I love how direct she is or whatever. And it was hard for me to fight back against that. But when I sat with myself in that moment, I ultimately did quit that job. I left a lot of money behind. It was a decade plus of trying to fight it out. Now I've, managed to create a lucrative life and career for myself, but not as linear as a pathway of sitting behind this desk and, counting numbers on Wall Street for, the decade before that. It was a more circuitous route. But my heart was telling me, that's my Everest. That's what I want to do. I'm curious about human potential. I'm curious about pushing my body. I'm curious about training 25 plus hours a week with the best athletes in the world and race. Like, that's what I'm curious about. It's not going to pay you anything. Doesn't matter. That's what I care about. And having that, it's hard, man. Like, look, I'm not saying it's easy. It was hard for me then. It continues to be hard. But my grandmother's not a bad actor here. Now, I say this in the book. I say, if some knucklehead on Instagram is like shit talking you in the comments, like that's easy. You're just like, whatever. That's a fucking random stranger. Like you can just like push, like sometimes it's hard to push that away, but like, that's a pretty simple one. We all know it at court. It's like, don't listen to that random dude who's telling you the earth is flat in Instagram comments. Fine. Right.
That's me.
But when it's somebody who loves you, like, yeah. But when somebody who loves
Flat
you,
Earther
like
69, fucking you.
What is your grandmother who's saying this because she's trying to give you sound advice based on her life experience? Like, that's not a bad actor. That's not criticism that's coming from a, disparaging place. That's a
but don't older
feedback.
People give you that perspective? Because I've gotten this too from like, I think as you get older, there becomes like an element of safety that becomes important. And I think like sometimes when you talk to people, especially that are older, and I've gotten this from my own parents and other people, there's this idea of like safety in this. And it's like, fuck safe, the ship at harbor is safe, but then what were ships made for, which is one of my favorite quotes. And, as we've been talking about this mindset stuff, I feel like anxious because I want to hear some really epic, like I've never climbed any of these mountains.
Let's talk about it.
And like when you keep talking about climbing your Everest, I keep thinking, is Everest the gnarliest one? Of these peaks, I mean, the crossing this, like, and I know it's impossible to kind of rate them, but is there ever like a thought where you're like, well, I climbed Everest, I should be able to get across Antarctica? I mean, or was there any, is Everest like the pinnacle? I mean, it's obviously the tallest mountain, but is it the most difficult? Is it the most demanding? And the one where you were like, holy shit, I'm going to fucking die today.
No, I mean, the short answer to your question is no, it's not the gnarliest thing that I've done. It's crazy enough, not by a long stretch. I've been fortunate to summit Everest twice. Both of those expeditions were challenging and hard earned. The latter of which I was able to do with my wife, which was a beautiful experience to share side by side with her, someone who doesn't fashion herself a lifelong adventure enthusiast or climber. So to get, the training and the prep and the build up to that, the book breaks down that story, which is pretty interesting and unique, I think, from a lens of setting a big goal that you're not necessarily, quote unquote, in the moment you set the goal for, prepared for, but still achieving it through, a process of fighting and battling your own inner demons. But, if I had to, it's so hard to rate all these things. Certainly being out in Antarctica, something no one's ever done in history, meaning there's no blueprint for doing it. There's no like, oh, hey, well, this guy did it this way, so it might probably work. Was definitely out there on my outer limits at that time. And being alone for 54 days in an environment that's trying to kill you every single day is obviously intense because you can't take a day off. I mean, obviously, literally couldn't take a day off in terms I'd run out of food, but emotionally, you can't take a minute off, a second off. The prologue of my book, The Impossible First, a memoir I wrote a couple of years ago, actually starts with one of the moments where I almost died out there, which is I set up my tent the exact same way every single day. Clip this, clip into this, pound this in the ground, whatever. And I couldn't have any extra tent with me, any extra shelter because every pound mattered. I needed as much food as I possibly could. So I definitely didn't have an extra tent with me. Wind's blowing crazy, but I always secure my tent down. But if my tent were to blow away, boom, I'm alone in Antarctica, middle of nowhere, no shelter, no hope for immediate rescue, like bad situation, could be very likely fatal. And I just messed up, man. Like I just didn't clip the rope on my thing to my sled to secure it. I put it down. I walk away from my tent and I look back and my tent lifts off the ground and it's blowing away. And I, again, the prologue of this book is me jumping and literally with my fingertips grabbing my tent and almost like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, just watching like the house just like spin off into the tornado. Like it was inches from being gone. And I've replayed that moment a million times in my head. I've written about it, et cetera. And that was right on its limit. And that's just, I'm out there for 54 days. And it's like, man, like one mistake out here is fatal. I'm making 1,000 decisions every single day. Zip this, clip this, step here, don't step here, whatever. And one mistake is that. So the stakes are real. But even that, to answer your question, is not the gnarliest thing that I've experienced. In 2001, I attempted to be the first person or part of an expedition to be the first people to climb K2 in winter. So for those that are unaware, maybe you guys know or don't know, but context, K2 is the second tallest mountain in the world. So it's about, what is it? It's 500 or so feet shorter than Everest. It's in Pakistan, on the Chinese border in the northern part of Pakistan. And it's the second tallest mountain in the world, but it's widely considered the deadliest mountain in the world. In summer conditions, about 380 people or so have ever summited the mountain, and 80 or 90 people have died attempting, which means for every 4 people who summit, one person dies. 25% fatality ratio on that mountain. And I got the bright idea to attempt to climb it, not in summer when the odds are 25% you're going to die, but in winter, something that at the moment, at that time, had never been accomplished. And a lot of, Nat Geo and New York Times and whatever had kind of called this the last great prize in mountaineering. So the 14 tallest mountains in the world had all been climbed in summer and winter. They'd all been soloed without this, but K2 was the last remaining one of these sort of big, behemoth, iconic, super high altitude mountains that had never been climbed in the winter season. And of course, probably goes without saying, but winter is considerably more difficult and it's considerably more challenging than the summer, based on the fact that it's, crazy cold and the winds are worse and the weather's worse and it's darker and the days are, all the things why walking outside your house is harder in the winter than it is in the summer. Well, you guys are in Texas, maybe it's flipped there, but you get what I'm saying. So anyways, in 2021, I attempted this climb and we're over there for about me and my climbing partner, a guy named Dr. John Kudrowski, who's an amazing climber, a dear friend of mine, climbed a bunch of stuff together over the years. And we decided to do this. And at the same time, several other teams of climbers from around the world kind of converge on this peak. One, because it's this iconic unclimbed objective, but also COVID had shut down the climbing season everywhere else in the world for the preceding 8 or 9 months. So all these professional climbers have been like trapped in their house, just like I had been. And all of a sudden Pakistan opens up permits for the winter and everyone's like chomping at the bit to do something. And the best climbers in the world, we all kind of know about this project out there, but it was the first time that all of a sudden, 24 people from around the world, a collection of the best climbers from all around the world, go over there all at the same time with the same objective. And, we can get into some of the more details if you want, but what ends up happening is we effectively collude. We collude in the sense that instead of kind of competitively working against each other, we just say like, well, let's figure out how to put ropes together. Like we're not climbing together, but we're kind of sharing base camp. We're sharing tips. We're looking at the weather together. We're not making our final decisions together, but we're talking, we're communicating rather than being like siloed in all these 2-person teams, like being like, yeah, F you, I'm going to get it first, whatever. What ends up happening on January 16th of 2021, a collection of 10 Nepalese kind of forged together from 3 different Nepalese teams, and they ultimately reached the summit, which was amazing. They claimed the last great prize in mountaineering, and I wasn't acclimatized yet. I was on the lower mountain, but I wasn't, in a position to go for the summit. And to be honest, was there a small amount of me that was like, oh God, I was hoping to be, get this world first, sure. But mostly it was just a massive celebration. The Nepalese have, for a long time been quite obviously the best climbers, the strongest climbers. They're genetically predisposed for it. They're just badass dudes. And they haven't really gotten their shine because Western climbers have hired them to work for them, and the economics haven't really worked out for a lot of Nepalese to push on their own projects. And Nims, as well as some other guys, Ming Maji, was able to get a collection of guys and have their own expeditions and push it. And honestly, man, like mad respect, like just big respect for these guys. I feel it now. I felt it at the time, even though I was on the mountain. There's no like, oh man, they got it. It was like, man, if anyone deserves to get it, it was these guys. But then let me paint a picture for you. I'm up at Camp 2. So I'm at about 22,000 feet, really technical climbing between there and the bottom. And my partner and I, John and I, because what you do is you climb up the mountain and you sleep a couple nights and you climb down. And you climb up the mountain a little bit higher, your body uses the altitude a little bit higher, then you climb back down. Then you wait for a weather window and you're carrying gear up, you're caching stuff, so that when you do go for your summit push, everything's in place, ropes, tents, all this kind of stuff. And we're climbing down, and several other climbers, again, in a similar cycle as us, are climbing down. We know the Nepalese are going for the summit. Again, our bodies aren't acclimatized that they were there a little bit before us. We're not ready to go for the summit. And we're thinking on the radio chatter, oh, did they summit? Did they not summit? And John and I, we see a bunch of climbers above us, the friends of ours, Chilean guy, Spanish guy, an Italian woman. We can see them above us. We're kind of shouting to them, whatever, friendly. We finally get off the ropes, and there's about a 2-mile walk back to base camp across this big glacier in Pakistan. And John and I just decide, like, we're going to turn off our radios. We're going to turn off our radios just to enjoy the silence, the stillness, the majesty of these mountains. So we walk back to base camp, the two of us just enjoying ourselves, and walk back into base camp. And as we get into base camp, we hear banging of pots and pans. The Nepalese cooks and their support staff, they're all outside. We just heard on the radio, the guys are on the summit. Like, they did it. They freaking did it. They did it. It's like, we knew they were going for it, but we didn't know if they were going to get it. Right. And in that moment, right as we walk into base camp, we hear that. We're like, oh my God, amazing, amazing. Congratulations, pots and pans. And then 1 minute later, Pakistani army military captain who was there, it's called a liaison officer, is kind of has to oversee the base camp to make sure people aren't like polluting anything or whatever. He's kind of overseeing. It's in a military zone. And he walks out and he says to us, Sergi fell. He's dead. I'm like, what? Two emotions. These guys did it. First in the world, do it. Oh my God, the Nepalese, it was proudest moment in Nepalese mountaineering history. Incredible. Sergi's dead. Sergi can't be dead. John and I look at each other. We just saw Sergi. We saw him just above us on the ropes. Like he was just above us on the ropes. We just saw him. Like, what are you talking about? And it turned out Sergi Mingote, one of the best Spanish climbers in the world, incredible climber, amazing guy, family guy, got 3 kids at home. Right after John and I got off the ropes, right after we turned our radios off, he made a mistake. He slipped, he fell. And literally where we were standing 5 minutes before, the same ropes that we were rappelling 5 minutes before, he slipped and fell 1,000+ feet to his death. These two things happen in the same moment, exact same moment. The brutality and the elation of high altitude mountaineering on full display. There was a sinking feeling, and certainly something that we all really had to deal with. Ultimately, helped carry Sergi's body onto a helicopter to get evacuated, and was like, well, is this expedition over? And we decided to stay. We sat with it. We saw the risk up firsthand. Sergi's tent and base camp was literally right next to mine. So I helped pack that up, and all of a sudden his tent was gone. Someone, our friend was passed away. But we still felt like we want to be here. We want to climb. And so did his climbing partner, a Chilean guy named JP. And look, man, I could tell a whole other, many more tales of this story. But the net of it is when we went for the summit, a couple of weeks later, after waiting out another long storm, John, my climbing partner, got a bad intuition, and he actually turned back. He turned back And we talked about it back down at base at sea level before we even went to Pakistan. We both said we know how dangerous this is, and if either of us get any feeling for whatever reason that either of us need to turn around, no shame in that. This is we're out. Like, you asked me if I'm doing something risky. This is as risky as I could possibly think. Like, we just watched someone die, and he just looks at me as we're leaving base camp, not long after leaving base camp, or not even to camp 1 yet, and he says, "I got a bad feeling, man. If I go any higher, I think I'm gonna die." And I tell a little bit of the story in the book, and there's actually, at the end of each chapter of this book, there's these QR codes that bring you to these short video clips from my expeditions. And this moment's captured just because I had my GoPro out when he was telling me. He was like, "I'm turning around, but Colin, you should go for it." And, look, I'm not too proud. Like, I've done some tough stuff. I'm not such a tough guy. Like, I'm crying, man. I'm crying. I'm super sad. Like, I'm like, man, what? Like, you're turning around, but I respect the hell out of him. I'm like, you're making the right call for you. Like, there's no judgment. There's no like, hey man, tough it out. Like, whatever. It's like, yo, if you're not feeling right, man, like, you're not 100, not even, you're only 99%. If you're not 100% on this, like, turn around. He's like, something's off for me, man. I got to turn around. So we have a tearful goodbye, but he says, keep climbing. So I ended up climbing, meeting up with a couple of Sherpas. So I'm climbing with their higher on the mountain. And then I climb by myself, and I climb all the way up to Camp 3. And I get up to Camp 3, which is up at 24,000 feet. I'm ultimately the first person to climb up there. So I'm now at 24,000 feet on K2 in winter, completely by myself. Whole bunch of things ensue. I won't get into all the details of that, but some other climbers can continue up there. There's kind of a mess of logistics. A couple people forget their tents. And again, that more details on that in this book, but not for this podcast. I'm going on too long of a story here. But in the end, I end up in a tent, my tent, and a couple climbers don't have their tent. So I let them inside of my tent. And there's 7 people inside of my 3-person tent, 24,000 feet on K2 in winter. And it's a one shot to go for the summit. And the other guys I respect the hell out of, like, truly, like, I rate my skills high in the mountains, but these are guys like the Michael Jordan of Pakistan, best climber in Pakistan, best climber in Chile, like, just dudes who I'm just like, man, like, these guys are like ride or die. Their climbing resumes are just legit of all legit. And they're saying, Colin, like, you climbed up here first. You were the fastest person to get up here. Like, you're climbing amazing. Like, we're going for the summit. We leave in an hour. Let's all, like, work together. Like I said, there was a camaraderie at this point established, and we're friends. And something came over me, man. I closed my eyes for a second. My body was feeling good. Check. Some logistics were a little bit off, so that wasn't great, but still was like, okay, like, I can do this. I know I can do this. I literally said, I know I can summit this mountain. Took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I'm in this scrum. There's 7 people smashing my 3-person tent. It's -50, -60 outside. And something inside of me, this intuitive voice, just says, turn around. Turn around. And I sat with that for a second. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm Colin O'Brady. I'm the guy who does hard stuff. I'm the guy who parts Antarctica by himself, does impossible things. There's something in my intuition that says, turn around. Turn around. And so eventually, hard decision, but I look over at the other guys. I yell out to a couple of their tents that are nearby of some of the other guys. They're climbing, and I say, hey guys, I know this might sound weird to you, but my intuition is telling me to turn around. What are you talking about? Your intuition? No, something's off for me. All right, man, if that's what you feel, we're going to go. We're going. We're leaving right now. You sure you don't want to come with us? I'm sure. I turn around. I stay there until the sun comes up that next morning, and then I climb down by myself. And 3 guys who left that night, 3 of the best climbers in the world, they climbed for this summit, and they never came back. They never came back. JP Moore, John Snorri, and Ali Separa. And then on the very, very last piece of that story is also at Camp 3 that morning when I turned around, a Bulgarian climber, a buddy of mine named Atanas, he'd gone up a little bit higher, but he also decided to turn around. So we're sitting in Camp 3 that morning. We're taking pictures. We're taking videos. We're like, man, what a weird climb, but we're not going to make it. But we're at Camp 3 on K2 in winter, and it was a sunny day because it was our summit day. It was like good weather for once. And so we take some pictures. We're enjoying the moment. And as I'm climbing down to the ropes, I hear some chatter on the radio, and I look down. You can see like thousands of feet down because it's clear. And I see this speck on the ground, and I realize somebody's fallen. And it turns out that not long after I was with Atanas, about 30 minutes after I was with him, he had slipped and fallen and fell all the way to the bottom of the route. So on that day, we lost Sergi on January 16th. And on the, between February 4th and February 5th, we lost 4 more of the best climbers in the world. Ultimately, 5 people died on that expedition in K2. So that's a really, really, really long-winded answer to what's the riskiest thing you've ever done and how do you measure that risk, and happy to answer any follow-ups. Forgive me for going on so long, but for me, it's a deep sadness. It's a deep trauma. I've done a lot of work over the last 18 months to really kind of, be able to even, talk about this in this way. And what I've learned is there's a difference between trauma and grief. Trauma is, something I highly respect. PTSD, wake you up in the middle of the night, afraid. I don't have that. I just not for any good reason. I don't, anyone who has that, man, my heart goes out to you, but I don't have that with this. But I have a lot of grief, man. I cry. I'm sad. Lost friends out there, lost good people, ultimately 15 kids whose fathers are, no longer alive. Between the 5 guys, I left 15 kids behind. It's tough, man. It's super tough. But what I write about in the book, and the reason I share this story is not to share war stories or this, but the lesson that I got from this. And again, it's not to say they were wrong, I was right, this and that, but it is, we have an inner voice. We do. We have an intuition, call it gut instinct, call it whatever you want, but we have this voice. And when I frame the chapter in the book, it's the limiting belief is I don't know what to do. And my answer to that is you do know what to do. You do have the answer. And so it might not be life and death stakes. You might not be on the edge of K2. You might be sitting at home going, hey, I just got this job interview or this job offer on the other side of the country, but I'd have to move my kids and they're in sports and they got good community. I don't know the right answer for you, but you know the answer to that. You don't have to weigh the pros and cons. You actually know the answer. Or you're dating somebody, you're thinking, should I get married? Is this the right person for me? I don't know. Weigh the pros and cons, try to logic it out, all this sort of stuff. It's like, go walk by yourself in silence for 12 hours, man. Like, you know the answer. You actually know the answer. And when that answer comes up and that intuitive voice tells you, marry the girl, don't marry the girl, take the job, don't take the job. Like, trust that. You don't have to logic it out a million times. And me trusting that instinct, because I'm sure there's many other times when I didn't throughout my life, but over the course of the work that I've done and the climbs that I've been on and diving into my own psyche and whatever, that voice, and without saying, but I'm climbing so well, but I'm the guy who does hard stuff. Like, I could climb this mountain right now. Yes, I could have climbed that mountain right now. And who knows what would have happened. But my voice, my intuitive voice in that moment said, for no other reason, you got to turn around, man. Something's off. The same echo that John had felt a couple days earlier. And it saved my life. And like I said, it might not be life or death stakes, but I'll tell you what, marrying the wrong person does have life or death consequences in the sense of your happiness and your utility over the course of the totality of your life. There are decisions that we make that either light us up and have a ripple effect of positivity throughout the totality of our life and not. And more often than not, in those really, really challenging, seemingly tough moments, you already have the answer. You just need to figure out how to tune into that voice. And I do believe, this is not me trying to pitch a book or whatever, but I do fundamentally believe quieting the noise, taking a day, taking a minute away from it all, taking 12 hours, taking a day can shed light. And that voice that's hard to hear over the noise of social media and our daily day, this, that, and the other thing, you give yourself a day, like, you know the answer. You know the answer.
Dude.
It's awesome.
No, I like one, thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell like the tremble in the voice that like it's still very fresh. So, I mean, dude, that's an amazing experience to share. And, selfishly, it's exactly what I was hoping to hear. I'm always amazed by like the strength of the human spirit. And more importantly, when people put themselves in these situations and somehow figure out a way to persevere. And I'm very sorry for your loss of your friends, man. That's, I've lost a lot of friends, suicide and weird things as an NFL player. And so, you carry all those individuals with you. I mean, we still got a bunch of time on this podcast, but I mean, if in any other situation, I'd be like, we're good. But, dude, well, what do you got?
Well, it is the powerful approach now that you take to break down each one of these limiting beliefs and then provide where your strong mental aptitude and mindset has overcome those. So I coach high school, and one of the biggest things that I aim to do is teach these kids how to write goals. So not only realistic, but also in the realization, it's not necessarily writing the goals as in, I'm going to score 4 goals a game. Okay, well, how about what leads to goals? Shots, assists, pass, or running the appropriate offense. So teaching them to write and come up with more processes that lead to the outcome of scoring a goal. So this in that step is creating this process almost at the base camp of what is the first thing that gets in the way. Your mindset, your limiting beliefs as written here, your fears of failure, of even taking the shot. You want to score the goal, but you're scared to even shoot. So that's the awesome thing that we have in here. My question for you now is, like, what led to the order of these limiting beliefs? Is it a hierarchy? Does it all lead from the easiest for you to tackle now to the most difficult one to summit? I'm very punny today, John. So that's what I'm handing off to you, Colin. What's the order of operations that you came up with these beliefs for the book?
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I love what you said about the way that you're coaching your team, high school team, on not just to set goals, but how to set goals, right? I love that. And I love that what I'm sure you call it this too, but the way I call that is incremental goals, right? It's like you got the goal, you got your big Everest. Cause I also say, hey, what's your Everest? We already talked about this, set that big goal. But the first thing I do with people once they give me that answer is I'm like, cool. So like, you want to climb that Everest? What can you do tomorrow? Literally tomorrow. What do you mean tomorrow? And I'm not in Nepal right now at the base of this. I'm like, great. Right. But like, can you read one article online? For whatever sport you're coaching, can you dribble the ball, 5 more minutes tomorrow, the next day? Can you crack the textbook on this if you're trying to study for, what's one thing, right? What's that incremental process to get there? And so anyways, man, I just want a hat tip to you because I love that. And I love nothing more than lighting people up about the big goal and then being like, but how we're going to get there is we're going to talk about all these incremental steps and this consistency and chipping away at this day by day. And that's how we're actually going to achieve, the big goal.
I mean, that was like Andy Stump's talk, the idea of the dominoes. Andy Stump, he's also been on Rogan a bunch, a friend of ours, a Navy SEAL, talking about how he passed buds and he just wanted to wake up every morning and see the sunrise. And he talked about it being like just stacking little dominoes to try to get a big, set of motion. One domino falls, it doesn't produce enough energy. You put 1,000 dominoes, it'll knock down a building. And like that idea of accumulating small goals. And I always wonder too, when you plan, like, I'm going to climb Mount Everest, and people throw that out there. I think for me personally, I'd be like, I just want to get to base camp. Like, how do I get to where's the parking lot to get to base camp? Because that's what I just want to get. Like, I want to get off the plane and get to the parking lot. Like, the other one that keeps going through my mind is, what food do you take for 56 days? Or was that how long it took you to
hold on? Yeah, John, I got an unanswered question here.
Yeah, we'll get to them all.
I can't get this food thing out of my mind. I'm thinking, 56 days? 7,000 calories?
Let's put that question on ice.
Yeah, shut the fuck up. But I'm doing the math in my head and I'm like, all right, 7,000 calories, 56 days. That's a lot of olive oil and coconut oil because you ate probably primarily fat because it's the most calorically dense stuff you could take.
Totally. So I just scattershot respond to a few things. One, I haven't heard that called with dominoes, but I freaking love that. That's awesome. I don't have it in my pocket right now, but I have for many years and still often carry this small rock around in my pocket. And it's a rock that I took from the summit of Mount Everest on 2016, from the very summit, a tiny little rock, little pebble. And I carry it as a daily reminder that Mount Everest, even the tallest mountain in the world, is really just a bunch of tiny little rocks stacked on top of each other, because you get to the top and there's still just one little pebble that makes it, 1 centimeter higher. And so I love the dominoes analogy. I'll use that as a mental framework for sure. But to me, it's always been just the stacking little rocks. I love that. Thanks for sharing that. In terms of the ordering of the limiting beliefs throughout the book, so the 12-hour walk, as you said, there's a couple introductory chapters that really talk about the walk itself and the regrets, what's your Everest, etc. All through these stories, some of which we've touched on here. But then each chapter after that, there's 10 chapters that are like, this is a limiting belief. I'm gonna throw you into a story. Like I said, At least I think it is. I hope you guys found it to be page turning and engaging and exciting in terms of the richness of the stories. But then at the end of that, it's like, great. I'm not just telling you stories to tell you stories. I'm telling you stories because like, here's how you can apply this in your life. And just kind of I think about it as it's just the way I am, my personality. I can get in the esoteric cerebral if I want to, nerd out, but in general, my way I communicate is through like, yeah, we're sitting down having a beer, broing down, having a chat. Like, let's just talk like that. So it's delivered in that way. Like we're just shooting the shit, hanging. And I'm just talking from my point of view.
This is the greatest form of teaching is storytelling. I mean, it's a reason that the Bible's written the way it is. I mean, it's a reason that, people Amen. Like for all the information that people are presented, it's the stories and the analogies that people remember and the way you made them feel. I mean, dude, as I'm sitting here listening to the story about you, K2, I don't know if you noticed, I kicked my mic and I just leaned forward and I was like, dude, this is like whenever you hope to be, at least for me personally, to be inspired by things, it's always through some like amazing story. You you can quote all the Seneca you want and try to pretend that you're a Stoic and, this and this. And I can, existentialism and all this other stuff I've read and was into. But at the end of the day, it's the story that an individual has in that moment where they make a decision that either results in, you saw, like for me, as I put myself, the ability to be able to see it and know that you can summit it and somehow like write your name on some wall of only a few hundred people have ever done it on this planet. And then the feeling of being like, I'm going to trust my gut. How many times have people been like, fuck that. I'm going to go for that brass ring. I'm going to go. And, if I die, I die. Whereas other people are like, you know what? I still have way more accomplishments to do. I got a wife at home. I got a family. Like there's so many more things. If I die at this moment, this extinguishes my story. So totally. That was amazing. I mean, because like I don't know if I would have had the ability to do it, to have it that close. And I mean that's
and in other times, it's interesting because the moral of that story isn't push up till your edge, and when it gets hard, turn around. Right?
No,
that's
not. I never said that. No,
I know you're not. I know you're not. No, I know you're not taking it that way. That's not what I'm saying. Like I'm saying, like, and that's the beauty of the intuitive voice, right? Which is my intuition in all sorts of other moments has been like, yo, man, like this is hard. Keep fucking going. Like, keep going, man. Like you got like, you think you're tired because you've had 50 days of 3,000 calorie deficit and your ribs are sticking out. My wristwatch in Antarctica started sliding down to my elbow. And I was like, do I keep loosening my wristwatch? I didn't realize you can actually lose enough like circumference in your wrist from starving yourself that your wristwatch is sliding around. It was on that level, right? My intuition in that moment was like, go, push. Like I got to the end of that Antarctica crossing and I'm 53 days in. I've been battling this brutal storm for the last 8 to 10 days. It's Christmas morning and all of a sudden the clouds clear for the first time in like over a week. And I've got videos of myself during this storm. I'm running low on food, so low on food actually that my wife, who's monitoring things back home, I'm talking to her via sat phone, quick check-ins every single day. She goes, I know you've been running on day 40. She goes, I know you've been running 7,000 and you're really hungry out there. But the only way you're going to get through this is you got to go down to 5,500. I just lost it. What are you talking about? She's like, I've run the math. I've run it 5 different ways. Like you got to go down to 5,500. And I was like, I can't even comprehend how you want me to do this. Cause I had like 7,000 calorie, like ration packs for the day. So I wouldn't like eat tomorrow's food today basically. And that was hard in itself, the willpower that when you're that hungry. And she's like, I know you're so mentally fatigued right now that I've actually figured out, like, here's what you need to do. She goes, go get she knows exactly what's in my sled. She's monitoring, right? She go get these bags. Okay. Take 3 scoops out of bag 1 and put it into this. Take 2 scoops from here. I mean, she literally like, I couldn't, there's no way I could do this.
You couldn't do the math.
Literally couldn't do the math. And I'm like, and also the visceral feeling of like, wait, like I almost fell over and collapsed from hunger yesterday at 7,000 tomorrow. And the next 20 days or so, I got to do this. But the intuitive voice in that moment didn't say, well, pack it in. Like you did pretty good. You made it for it. My intuitive voice in that moment was like, get through this. You got to figure it out. Like keep at it. Like not saying it wasn't, I mean, I got videos of myself being like, I just want to give up, but I'm not going to. And that's what's so beautiful about the intuition is like, in comparing and contrasting that Antarctica moment to this, like I get to the 53rd day, the weather clears and I start pulling my sled. Finally, the weather's clear. I literally could barely, my sled was a lot lighter at this point. It wasn't 375 pounds anymore because I literally had basically a couple of days of food left with me and barely pick up, my bag that has a couple, my sleeping bag in it and throw it in my sled. Start pulling my sled. And all of a sudden, I just tap into this deep flow state. It's one of the beauties of being in this much stillness and this much silence. You're tapping into these flow states, but this was the most powerful ever in my life. I'm just locked in, completely locked in this flow state. For whatever reason, my mind just starts doing math. I start going like, okay, how far away am I from the finish? I look down my GPS, 77 miles, closer than any person's ever been to this crossing. A guy made it almost about 100 miles from the crossing, 71 days in, and he fell ill and died in 2015. I'm like, wow, no one's ever been this close. Okay, 77 miles. Well, how far am I going on average every day? 15 or so-ish miles. My best day have been like 20. So, okay, 77 miles. Maybe best case scenario, I got 4 days left. I look at my sled, 4 days-ish left of food on these reduced rations. It's like really tight. Okay, 4 days. Okay, 4 days of pulling my sled. Well, how many hours is that? 40-ish, 40 some amount of hours. Okay, I started measuring this thing in months and then in weeks and then in days. Now I'm measuring this thing in hours. I'm still locked in this flow state. In Antarctica, it's 24 hours of daylight, right? And I'm there in the Antarctica summer. So it's the one like weird thing about it. Like, despite the whole thing being flat and the edge of the earth.
Well, I was going to say the aliens must have
stuff,
tapped into you and helped you with the flow state.
Right. But the aliens tapped in and the lights on all of a sudden, it's 24 hours of daylight. No. So I say to myself, I'm like, well, the sun's never going to set here. Every single hour of the day is the exact same. The sun's directly overhead. And so I said, my intuitive voice in that moment says to me, it goes, Colin, what if you don't stop? What? What if you don't stop? What if you don't set up your tent again? What? No, just don't stop. Just keep going. Just ride this flow state all the way out. And all of a sudden I listened to the intuitive voice in that moment. I was like, I'm having a conversation with myself, right? But I'm like, you're right. You're right. And I literally say to myself, I am not stopping until I get to the edge of the Antarctic continent. It's 77 miles away. I've never gone more than 20 miles and I'm the most exhausted and the most hungry and the most tired that I've ever been. But my mind all of a sudden forgot all of that weakness. My mind bought into, I can see myself at the finish line. 10 hours goes by, 15 hours goes by. My family's back home. It's Christmas Day, coincidentally. They're tracking me on this GPS tracker that they can see a signal from, every so often. And I stop at the same time every single day, 8 p.m. Antarctica time, 3 p.m. back home in Oregon, 9 p.m., 10 p.m. They're like looking like his dot's still moving. Oh, maybe he's getting an extra hour in. Another 10 hours goes by. He's still moving, but they're starting to freak out now because they're like, what is he still moving? What's happening? He's never done this, but I'm just locked in. 25 hours goes by, 30 hours goes by. Ultimately, 32 and a half hours goes by. On the very horizon, I see this post. I know there's a post that marks the edge of the continent. I'm like, I've researched this, whatever. And I can see it in the distance. I realize I'm about to do it. I sit down on the ground for a second, just look out, take a few deep breaths, still in this flow state. And the resonance wasn't, Colin, you're the shit, man. Yo, you did this shit that no one's ever done. You're such a fucking badass. The voice was saying, infinite love, an echo of just the resonance of the connection to my family, the connection to my community, the connection to the kids and the people I was trying to inspire. But ultimately, just the resonance. I was alone. I was probably quite likely the most isolated human being on the entire planet at that moment. But I felt connected to it all. I felt connected to energy, to source, the universe, whatever I don't know. I'm not particularly traditionally religious person, but however you want to call that, a greater power, just connected into that. And with that final last breath of energy, I walked to the edge, touched the post, and I became the first person in history to cross Antarctica solo, unsupported and human powered. But again, the intuition knew. I knew the answer in that moment. It was guiding me. It was guiding me to make that decision. So it's not always guiding you to turn back. It's not always guiding you to turn forward. It's not always guiding you to turn right or turn left or do the thing or don't do the thing, but it is guiding you because we know. So, man, I didn't order the limiting beliefs in any particular order. To answer your first question, I didn't order them in any particular order. Obviously, I ordered them because I thought about how I want to construct this book, but they're not ranked. They're not this one's better than that one. I did ask a lot of people, including my Instagram audience and other folks, like, what is stopping you from living your best life? Just ask that question over and over again. Put it in my Instagram comments, just ask people. And you think you're going to ask that question over and over again, you're going to get like 1,000 different responses. But it turns out that I basically just got the 10. I really got the same 5 or 6, and then like, stretch that to like the same 10 over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I was like, holy shit. So you guys are all just like me, and we're all just dealing with like the same, like, handful of limiting beliefs that are some version of, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. What if I fail? I'm not strong enough. What if people criticize me? I hate being uncomfortable. And so it's structured in that way. And the truth of the matter is that I think each one of the limiting beliefs in the 12-hour walk, we can all relate to, because I think myself included, we've all experienced them at some point in our life. You might be at a phase in your career. I've been fortunate to reach this phase in my career where I don't have enough money is not a current limiting belief. I've spent a lot of my life feeling that way, a lot, the majority of my life. And I've worked super hard. That's not a current limiting belief based on circumstances I work super hard for. If that's where you're at, like, that limiting belief isn't in your current psyche, but I'm guessing it's been in your psyche at some point. And that's true of any of these. Maybe you're not afraid to fail. Maybe you're not afraid to fail anymore. You failed a bunch and you realize that, and I love to say, failure plus perseverance equals success. At some point along the line, we learned that lesson. I wouldn't wish the burn accident on my worst enemy. Burn yourself to a crisp, be in Thailand, be afraid, pain, the suffering, the cause of harm to my family. But in the end, that shit taught me some of life's greatest lessons, as I'm sure the accident of the injury in your NFL career. You're like, man, like, that taught you resilience and grit. And those 10 seasons that you had after that were built upon the intensity and the being able to overcome that obstacle. And so we learn, I didn't fail. I either succeeded or I learned something. Failure plus perseverance equals success. So again, that may or may not be your limiting belief in this moment, but I would find it very hard to believe. I hope there's people out there, but I would find it very hard to believe that someone reads this book and all 10 chapters are like, yeah, man, I don't deal with any of these. No, I've never had any of these doubts ever before in my mind.
Well, then you're the one. I always tell people, I'm like, you're the one who's never failed. Like, you're Neo. Like, fuck, you just break the matrix. I mean, it's... dude,
so I mean, I'm like, hell yeah, man, I want to hang out. Like, DM me, let's hang out. Like,
I'd love to know all these people that don't have any self-doubt. But I mean, so at Berkeley, I was a rhetoric major, and there was a lot of English philosophy, and I read a ton. And like, I always go back to, and I can't remember, there's two things. Like, one, people make their own prisons. So I mean, we are, and it came from a story of this guy who was incarcerated, and he while he was I can't remember exactly who it is, but like, he was a political prisoner, and he basically, like, in his mind built this clock. And when he got out, he like basically built the clock into the Smithsonian. And so the idea was that, like, we built our own prisons, and even in his mind, he was free regardless of how he was encased. And then the other one I pulled up, and I don't know why this one popped into my mind, but it was a Russian philosopher said, all religions will pass, but this will remain, sitting in a chair, looking in the distance, staring at the mountains. And like, I think about, like, all this religion and people, this imagery and what I think, like, how many people have stood at the bottom and looked up at Mount Everest over, the eternity of time, regardless who they were. And you know what? And, nobody will ever climb that. And then people do and reach that. It's just the pictures alone. Like, as I pulled up some of these pictures of Everest and some, like, K2, as you're talking about them, like, just looking at the pictures gives me a sense of, like, angst and, like, fear, where you look at it and you're like, holy shit, like, people have climbed that, and how many people have died and summited. And dude, it's fucking inspiring. I thought you were going to say, when you were going, you're like, I'm going to go 40 straight hours. There was, like, the little Pee Wee Herman voice, like, I say we let him go. You're like, I say we start eating. I mean, so, like, what, and I go back to this, like, what is the food? Like, I mean, you have to take something that doesn't spoil, but it's super cold. So it's not like heat's going to go, but something that's not going to freeze like a rock that you're going to have to spend a ton of time.
Whiskey.
Mostly whiskey.
I mean, I'm there. Fucking let's go. Rocky Fuel, Xfinity Moonshine. But like, explain.
The thing is that the whiskey would be good, except for the fact that it's extraordinarily hard to navigate, and you're staring at a compass the whole time. And so after a few shots, it's just real hard to walk in a straight line in the middle of Antarctica. So I had to divert from that, plan A. It's a great question, and it's a question I asked myself based on, so no one's done this before, meaning there's not a blueprint. I can't call up a guy and be like, yo, so like, when you walked across Antarctica solo without, any kites or dogs or whatever pulling you, like, how did you do it? What did you eat? I can look at the history of polar exploration going back, to the Ernest Shackletons and the Amundsens and the Scotts of the early 1900s and go all the way into the future and look at what people have done. But I looked at it and I was like, man, people in the, quote unquote modern era, over the last 20 years or so are actually still eating on polar expeditions pretty much what the guys in the early 1900s ate, which is to your hypothesis or thesis, high fatty foods. But something called pemmican is really common, which is basically like boiled down bacon, fats and things like that. I was like, okay, right. I don't have like any significant aversion to that, but like I haven't eaten that way a lot in my life. What I really would be supporting my health the best in the most intense circumstance. So I actually went into a food science lab and I said, test me 100 different ways. Let's do a bunch of stress tests. Let's this. And the end of this equation is we are going to feed me whatever works the best for my body, my composition, whatever we find out, et cetera. And if you tell me, I've got to eat, corn on the cob, probably not the most weight efficient, but we'll figure that out. It's like, it doesn't matter. You got to drink milk the whole time. You got to, just like, there wasn't like a constraint. It was just like, what's the most efficient burning for my body? For all these stress tests, blood tests, all these, VO2 max, all the various different things in my body, and blood and body composition, et cetera. We came up with what we dubbed a one-of-one custom, the Colin bar, which was essentially, you guessed it earlier, a bunch of coconut oil. It ended up being completely plant-based. It was coconut oil, nuts, seeds, plant-based protein, a combination of some extra, supplementation in terms of, magnesium and things like that. But essentially, I had a little bit of warm soup mix at night and a few things to just kind of keep me warm inside of my tent. But the vast majority of my calories, and I ate it people were like, well, you didn't eat something different every day. No, I ate the exact same thing every single day, these chopped up squares. And what's interesting, again, you're obviously very, very intuitive, smart guy, which is these bars at room temperature would just melt in a pile, because they're so high in coconut oil and fats. But we were like, but they're going to be minus 30 the entire time. So they're just going to implicitly stay frozen. And so I actually would just put them in my jacket against my warm body heat, warm them up enough that I could bite into them. And that was it. Each bar was about the size of maybe the length of an iPhone, but 2 times as thick or fat as an iPhone, something like that. And each one of them had 1,110 calories in them. So obviously, as oils and fats are the most calorie dense, take basically calories, but you do still need carbs. You do still need protein. The macros were something about 50, 30, 20 in terms of fats, carbs, and protein. And that's what I ate the entire time. And it worked. And a funny little side story, there was, like I mentioned before, we'll get all the details, but there was a guy who I was racing out there. I thought it was a meat race in history, and it turned out there was another guy, British explorer, attempting to cross in the same time. We ultimately got dropped off on the same day, basically right next to each other. Boom, gun start, in fact, not a real gun. Him and I just waved at each other. It was like 932 miles, ready to go, race history and race this other dude. And he smokes me in the first week, just completely smokes me. Long story short, I catch up to him and we know how the story ends. I just shared, which is, I finished and he finished a few days later. But in the early days, when we were in this encampment in Antarctica, he sees me packing my sled and he's like, what do you got over there? And I tell him, I did this, high-tech food study and I created these custom things and whatever. And he looks at me, he's proud British explorer, badass, equivalent of a Navy SEAL in the UK, special forces guy. Actually, someone I have a ton of respect for. We maintained a friendship at this point, but in this moment it was heated because we were racing each other. It was intense. And he's like, oh, this is some stupid American thing. Us Brits, we've been doing polar exploration for 100 years. Brits have a long lineage of proud, extreme accomplishments in the polar extreme. The Americans, not so much. And he's like, oh, this fussy American here. I'm eating bacon and I'm eating salami and I'm eating cheese. And what are you doing measuring out the actual thing or whatever? I finished a few days before him, although to his credit, he did finish the crossing, which nobody else had ever done. It was a massive accomplishment for him. I waited at the end to congratulate him because after all that camaraderie,
you're hey, loser, hurry up, with a finger in the air.
Finally, motherfucker.
Yeah, you're I've been waiting for you for days. I kicked your fucking ass. Get over here, you fucking limey bastard.
Not so much. Yeah, not so much. It was mostly love, man. And we stayed in touch. And last year he was going back to Antarctica. he was going back to Antarctica. He was guiding a guy, a really interesting guy, actually, a British military guy who I think he was injured, wounded warrior of some kind. And he was helping him to do a big polar, but not a world record, but a really impressive polar crossing. And he calls me up and he's like, kind of hat in hand a little bit. And he's like, yo, man, like, can you tell me a little more about like those bars that you had out there? I'm like, really? And he's like, I know I gave you a hard time, man. That seems like that kind of worked pretty well. I'm thinking about doing something else. So just like anything, man, 1% gains, little tweaks, looking at something, the way that something's been done for, man, when I was a swimmer growing up, I look at the way kids are training now in swimming and the times are getting faster. And I would go, man, they're training less than me. No, they're just training smarter. They're training more effectively. Like they figured something out about rest and sleep that my coaches in the 90s and the early 2000s, like hadn't figured out yet. And it's just, I don't think I'm some genius or something like that, but I just looked at something like this has been doing the same way 100 years. Like surely there's a slightly better way to optimize this. And the food was certainly, and hacking that in the way that I did was certainly one of my huge keys of success out there, no doubt.
Yeah. Like the bacon and what the other guy brought, I mean, that temperature, think about how solid those are even at like the amount of time and effort that it would have taken to actually get those things into a palatable place
totally
would have just destroyed it. So that's why I was like, man, it's got to be. So if you look at like, there's more calories in like a 55-gallon drum. And I only know this because we were kind of like doing I did a blog post about like surviving the apocalypse and like how you would effectively eat if you were in like a 55-gallon drum of coconut oil and then like some local hunting, you pretty much, cause you'll die on a starvation, die on a diet of rabbits. It's called a starvation diet, right? Like lean meats is fucking death to you. So like, and most wild game's pretty lean. So, you have organs in this and they were like 55-gallon drum of coconut oil and then kill everything you see and eat it. And you're usually pretty good. Because you need essential fats. You obviously need protein. Carbs, you could weight either way. But man, that's super heady. And the only thing I think of is everything in every bar that I've ever had, because I was thinking about economy of packing. So they would have to be packaged in such a way within like a spatial relationship to be able to pack efficiently. You just couldn't have random sizes like bacon. It just would fuck everything up. Yeah. So as I was thinking about it, I was like the economy, the spatial relationship of packing that, the food, the calories, the calculation piece, it would have to be bars, geometric shapes, and something that you could easily warm up without too much effort. So that's
totally. And I put it into, like you said, it was like, I kind of said the iPhone shape, it's kind of a square rectangular shape. But then I went before the Antarctica crossing, a couple months before that, I went to Greenland and I did a 27-day crossing of Greenland to train. Just to test some stuff and whatever and food. And what I realized there was, to your point, it was like, oh, these are bars, but it'd be so much easier if they were smaller. And so I cut them up into what ended up, just by the math, being about 100-ish calories, but these square chunks or cubes basically. And so I cut, however many bars into however many cubes. That could be in a plastic bag with my big mittens. It's -30 outside. It would be way easier for me than to like open a thing or whatever. I can just put one cube with like an open palm and throw it in every 30, 45 minutes, 100 cal, 100 cal, 100 cal, 100 cal.
What was your first meal after you were done? Like once you
that was my next question.
Oh, your fucking brain is exactly where mine is. Cause I'm thinking once you eat these bars for 54 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you get, and I don't know what like the first outpost was, or like what was the first real meal where you were like, I don't know where you, Chile would be what to go to Chile?
Yeah. So we got finally picked up on that, far edge of the Ross, or the edge of the Ross ice shelf, to take him back to the other side of Antarctica, near where we started, 900 miles away. And we got back to this little encampment. It's called Union Glacier. And this wasn't my actual dream meal. I'll tell you what my dream meal was when I got back to Chile. But the first thing happened is I go back and there's a buffet. Like, it's like an encampment. It's not like super nice. It's like poop barn tents and whatever, but it's like a little bit heated and there's a proper kitchen there. There's something basic. Considering where you are, it's like amazing. But if I put you there right now, you'd be like, I'm in like the worst place ever. But you're like, oh my God, compared to where I just was, incredible, like a warm-ish room and a buffet. And I walk up to this buffet and look, I've like lost so much weight. I'm skinny, like my ribs are hanging out, like whatever. And I just fill up 2 massive plates of everything, just, pasta and rice and like whatever else, chow mein, whatever else they got on there. And I go down, I can barely remember what it was. And I just like stuff myself 2 full plates of food. And immediately, like, my stomach hurt so bad because my stomach is such a calorie that my stomach had, like, gotten so small. But my mind is like, food. And so I walk back up to the counter, fill 2 more heaping plates of food, and I just can't help myself. And I'm eating them. Every bite is literally like hurting and retching in my gut. And I was like, I can't stop myself. And I'm like, I should probably stop, but I can't. And I walk back up and I get a full like pumpkin pie and like 3 other desserts from this buffet. And I just crush that too. And like, I literally can like barely walk now to my tent, but I was like, so like the emotional side of like, I can eat as much as I want. I just couldn't freaking help myself in that moment. But so there was that, and I felt terrible. And I, the worst side of my life.
And didn't puke.
I didn't throw up.
Wow.
I didn't throw up. Actually, no, I didn't. But coming out the other end, I think my body was just, what is going on here?
Clear.
But I did, again, you said Chile, which is where we flew back to. It was a place called Punta Arenas, Chile. And that's where my wife, Jenna, met me. And it was an incredible reunion. And of course, she's like, wherever you want to go, we go to whatever you ever want to eat. Like, what are you craving? Like, what is, and everyone assumed it'd just be like kind of what I just did. Oh, huge pizza and a this and a that. And I looked at her and I was just like, I want an avocado and salad. She's like, what are you talking about? But like, nothing in Antarctica is alive. So nothing can live on the interior of Antarctica. There's no tree, there's no soil, there's no bacteria, there's no birds, there's no bugs, like nothing. Obviously on the coast, there's teeming sea life, but on the interior of Antarctica, beyond like the distance of like a penguin can walk, basically, there's nothing. And so there's something about like just something alive or something that was recently living, like just like green, fresh, like whatever. That was just like, I just wanted that crispy like taste. And so obviously I ate some more calories than that, but what I was really truly craving was some fresh anything, berry, a fruit, salad, an avocado, etc. So that my wife arranged that in spades.
Makes sense. I got one final quick question. Now, we've never climbed, not that I know of, John. For you,
Mount Whitney.
Mount Whitney. Yeah. I don't know what that is, but
it's the tallest in the lower 48.
Yeah,
tallest in the lower 48.
So my brother and I, just stupid story. We drove up, had backpacks, and we figured we could get from like wherever, like where the parking lot is, to the summit and back down in the day. Yeah. And we didn't, and we got fucking stuck up there huddling together underneath like a tarp. And then we fucking came down, but like with 0 gear, like it was just stupid kid stuff, and we were fine. But yeah, we went up and down.
Listen to your inner voice.
The inner voice, I keep going. I'll tell you what, Dr. John and I, who I mentioned from the K2 story, I told you we climbed a bunch of other stuff. A very short aside. Talked about a little bit in the book, 12-hour walk, but we did the 50 high points road record. Like I said, the 50 tallest peaks in the United States, tallest in each state, and we did it in 21 days. Mount Whitney being the tallest in California. So we rocked that out in, I think it was 6.5 hours round trip. So it can't be done, my friend. You can go back and run it back. Like,
Yeah, well, we didn't.
It's usually a couple days. You usually camp up there and a whole thing. And,
if we would have started it like at like daybreak, but we got there at like maybe around like we thought like lunch, like maybe 10 in the morning, and we figured we would just sprint to the top and then back down. And we totally got, it was fucking pitch black when we turned, like, and then we got stuck in that
youth.
That
the
meadow.
Strength and naivety of youth. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, we came down, we got stuck in that meadow, and then we fucking huddled together, and then woke up, and like I remember the sun coming up, and we sprinted down. We got in this truck and we drove to like whatever, like Lone Pine, with like this like little cafe, and I remember I got like 7 sides of bacon and like 6 eggs. And like, I remember the guy was like, hey, I want 4 side orders of bacon. This dude, we just fucking
He's like, are you expecting other people? You're no,
it was just me and my brother. And then we drank a huge thing of orange juice and then got in the car and drove back. I must have been 14.
Perfect.
I was in high school. My brother was maybe 13. My brother was a senior, so he was like 17. So I was 13. Yeah, like 13 and 17.
Love it.
All right. So
you said final question.
Yeah, there's a lot of climbing movies out there, including K2 starring Michael Biehn, who's that dude from Terminator, John Connor's dad. He's also in Navy SEALs. You'd recognize it if you saw him.
Okay.
I didn't know his name. I had to look it up. And then Vertical Limit starring Bill Paxton and Chris O'Connell. And then there's Cliffhanger. And Everest is, I think, the latest one. But there's all these climbing survival dramas with some capers going on in the top of the mountains. I'm just curious of how realistic Hollywood is making these awesome survival drama heist movies.
I love it. I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to ask you guys a question. I can't not get one question on you guys before I answer the final bonus round of how real is Vertical Limit, which is, so with the 12-hour walk, obviously it can be taken any single day, whatever, it doesn't matter. But book comes out on August 2nd, and I am trying to catalyze a group of people on September 10th to take the walk. The walk is done alone, but together alone, meaning a bunch of people are doing it on the exact same day around the world. The question for you guys is, you guys taking the 12-hour walk with me? Any day, but September 10th will be
let's do it. September 10th. Book it. Yeah, we'll do it. I'll do it.
Mark it.
Yeah, put it down.
Boom.
Yeah, I'm in.
Boom. I love it. I love that. Amazing. All right. We got 2 more joining the global movement. My goal is 10 million. Okay. Two less.
Sweet.
So amazing. I love that. Thank you. And I can't wait to hear your experiences in the aftermath. So September 10th, you guys heard it here. These boys are joining me. Anyone listening, hopefully, please join 12hourwalk.com. You can sign up. It's completely free. Other than I'll just send you some inspiration to kick you off. You can do it on any single day if September 10th doesn't work, but that's the 12-hour walk day coming up after the book debut. So the more important question, Vertical Limit. But first of all, of all those dramas, to me, I know Cliffhanger might be more famous, Sylvester Stallone, whatever, but Vertical Limit has this scene in it that all mountaineers, all mountaineers, good mountaineers talk about, which is there's this moment where Chris O'Donnell, he gets to a crevasse and he's like, I can't get to the other side of this crevasse. There's this whole subplot where they're like, there's explosives in the guy's backpack, and if it goes off, the whole thing's going to have, that's whatever. That's a bunch of, B and C plot line. But he gets this, and he needs to get to the other side, and he's running out of time before the explosive goes off. And so he takes 2 ice axes out in his hands. He's got his crampons on his feet, and he runs and he jumps. And this gap is like 50 feet across. So obviously he's not going to get to the other side of the top of it. But he's gonna fall into the crevasse until he hits the crevasse wall. And there's this scene where he's running and he's swinging both ice axes in the air, like, wah! And then he just 2 ice axes in, front points his crampon, just sticks it into the wall. And then he just goes, one hand by hand, he climbs out of the crevasse. And so first of all, the physics of that are impossible. There's a 0% chance that would ever work. But it's really difficult when you get to a massive crevasse. Like the actual mechanics of how you actually get across that. There's a few different techniques with ropes or climbing down or across or way around it in certain cases. It's a big hazard. And there's never been a time where I've gotten a moment like that in the mountains where I haven't looked at it and be like, yo, man, should we just vertical limit this shit? Like, Chris O'Donnell did it.
He's Robin.
I honestly, I pulled it up. I don't remember this movie. I might never have seen this, but Cliffhanger. Yeah, I fucking love it when Stallone's basically just hanging on one finger and the helicopter comes up. He's just hanging around, just fucking jacked, way too muscular. Yeah. First of all, any of the climbers I've ever seen, I've been I grew up in Southern California, so Yosemite and all that, going out and seeing those dudes always look like really hungry hippie dudes that 30 pounds too light, Stallone's fucking jacked.
You're not built like a true rock climber. I mean, no. a lot of weight, but Stallone's jacked. But I will say on another wreck. That is a documentary. If you haven't seen it, I think it's on Netflix, The Alpinist. It came out this year. It's a documentary about this guy named Marc-Andre Leclerc. And it is, I'm not going to tell you anything other than that, but if you want to see a true, talk about storytelling, a storytelling masterpiece, just take my word for it. Give it a watch, The Alpinist. And it'll give you a little more realistic look than Vertical Limit. But if you want a good laugh and you want, some good Hollywood drama, go check out Vertical Limit. But just don't try that move the next time you end up at the edge of a crevasse, because I don't think you'll stick the landing.
No, the physics aren't going to work on that one. Nope. I've seen as you were talking about it, one of my favorite, we have a thing on Power Athlete. If you follow our Instagram, it's Be the Hammer, where it's just like Friday, where people are just fucking themselves up, putting on social media. And my favorite one is there's always some lady, and I know you've done rope swings like I have, but there's always some overweight lady who's on a hillside getting ready to do a rope swing to try to jump out. And as she goes, not realizing the physics of her body and her grip, and just fucking slides down it and face plants on a fucking rock. Those are my favorite. And I'm just imagining this one as you're jumping. You put the crimps in, and then the fact that you have to try to hold these handles with 10 G's, like a force going down. You're right at the bottom.
Gone.
So, yeah, the same thing with you know what I'm talking about with the heavy ladies on.
I recall
it just swings and just fucking face plants, and they're like, she gone.
Yeah. We watch a lot of movies.
Classic.
Colin.
Classic.
I
love it.
I enjoyed our opportunity to talk about the 12-hour walk, and even more so when we get to act the 12-hour walk coming up in September, man.
And if anybody doesn't know how to get a hold of you, which seems next to fucking impossible, Instagram handle, email, websites, any.
Yeah. Hit me on Instagram. I'm at Colin O'Brady. This is my name, COLINOBRADY. And to get everything, the 12-hour walk, check out 12hourwalk.com. We can download the 12-hour walk app. That'll help with that whole process. But it's as simple as walking out your front door, putting your phone on airplane mode, and committing to the 12 hours in solitude and silence. It's for anybody. You don't got to train for it. It's you go 1 mile, you go 50 miles, but you maintain that solitude and silence. And there is a possible mindset on the other side, that mindset that says you can do anything. The possibilities are limitless. And please, I'm so excited that 2 of you are joining on September 10th, and invite everyone listening to sign up, get involved, and come take the 12-hour walk. There's a lot to be gained by it. Book comes out on August 2nd. If this comes out for it, you can pre-order it after that. You can get the book. But yeah, 12hourwalk.com, at Colin O'Brady on Instagram. And it has been an absolute pleasure to hang with you guys. And I definitely look forward to following up with you guys on the other side of September 10th and hearing your individual stories, breakthroughs, curiosities on the other side of the 12-hour walk. It's a powerful experience for everyone. So yeah, I'm excited to follow up with you guys on that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on Power Athlete Radio.
Bye. Appreciate you guys.